In this video tutorial, I will explain how to create OverIM applications for different languages and cultures. Here I have a very small application, which by default is for English-speaking users. Essentially, all it does, it displays a thank you message using this process here. It also allows users to enter decimal numbers and dates using this object. Let me show you. So I log into the application using the default admin password credentials. I now run the process and it displays the message in English. Let's now create some decimal numbers and dates. Decimal numbers are entered using dot as decimal separator. I can't even use comma even if I wanted to. And when we use dates, we can see the calendar displays months and dates using English names. Let me now show you how to translate this application into some other language, for example Spanish. The first thing we need to do is create a new locale. Let's give it a name, Spanish. I will explain the use the locale by default checkbox and the default dates and time formats a little later. Let's focus on translations for now. We need to provide translations to all strings used in our application. There are two types of strings: those hard-coded in the system or system strings, and those used in the configuration of the application. System strings are already translated in many different languages, and all translations are provided in this directory here. So we just need to pick our language from this drop-down here. And I select Spanish. If your language is not present in the drop-down, you can add your own system translations for your language by adding a file to the messages directory. I will also choose the culture here. The culture determines decimal and thousand separators for numbers, as well as display of dates and months in the calendars. All culture files are stored in this directory. So you can add your own culture or modify the existing one if need be. The area here contains all strings present in the configuration of your application. OverIM automatically extracts strings from messages used in rules, choices used in attributes, menu and operation names, and many other places where strings are used in your configuration. So you can see all strings here, and you can provide translation for each string. For now, I will only translate the thank you message displayed by our process. So we find the thank you string here. Here it is. And provide the translation. But how will the system know which locale to use when the user logs in? The default English locale or the Spanish locale? The locale used by OverIM is determined from the value of the locale attribute of the currently logged in user. Each member of the system user group has this attribute defined, including the default regular user object. Here it is. If the value of this attribute is not defined, a default locale will be used. Otherwise, the specified locale will be used. You can set any locale that you define to be the default one if you tick the Use this locale by default checkbox. Only one locale can be made the default one, and if none is defined, the English locale will be used by default. I could make the Spanish locale the default locale and test it, but to make it more interesting, let's create another user and assign Spanish locale to this user. I have added the locale attribute to the form of the regular user object. So we can assign it at runtime. Let's do it. So I log into the application again using admin password credentials, and here I have a query that shows all users and allows me to add a new one. So I click on the New button and create a new user. Here I can see the locale attribute displayed. AwareIM automatically displays it as a drop-down and populates the drop-down with all available locales. We only have one. So I pick Spanish here. And click Create. As you can see, we now have two users, the default admin user and the new one, Marcos. The admin user has no locale defined, and so the default will be used. Since we did not define any locale as a default locale, the English locale should be used for the admin user. And the new user will use the Spanish locale. Let's now log out and log in as the Spanish user. Now, when we run the process, we can see that the Spanish message is displayed. Let's now create some numbers and dates. You can see that I can no longer use dot as decimal separator. Instead, I must use comma, because in the Spanish culture, comma is used as decimal separator. And if we look at the calendar, we can see that dates and months are now displayed in Spanish. If we log out and log in as admin again, we can see that everything works in English as before. Of course, there are other strings to translate here. Names of menu items, captions of forms, labels of attributes, and so on. You can actually export the entire table of configuration strings into a file and provide translations in this file rather than inside AwareIM. You can then import this file back into AwareIM. This can be useful if you want to outsource your translations to some third party which does not have AwareIM installed. Let me also explain what the default date and time formats mean. Normally, when you specify attributes of the date or timestamp types in business objects, you provide the format of the date explicitly here. However, you can define date format in the locale and then choose Take from Locale option here. If you do this, AwareIM will use the date format specified in the locale of the current user for this attribute. AwareIM also supports right-to-left layout, or RTL, for those users whose languages flow from right to left, for example, Arabic or Hebrew. There is a special attribute in any member of the system user group called RTL. Just like the locale attribute. If the value of this attribute is yes, AwareIM uses right-to-left layout everywhere. Let me show you. Again, I have added the RTL attribute to the form of the regular user object. Here it is. So that you can explicitly specify whether a particular user supports right-to-left layout. Let's create another user with this layout. So I log into the application again and create a new user. I will make sure that the RTL flag is ticked for this user. Let's now log out and log in as this user. You can see how dramatically different the screen layout is. Everything is displayed from right to left. So there you go. As you see, it's quite easy to create applications for different languages and cultures in AwareIM.